Syracuse is losing some key players due to college eligibility, but the good news is it's nowhere near as bad as what last year was.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. Thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. And of course, we are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are going over some of the top players that Syracuse football is losing due to college eligibility. These are players that, whether or not they want to come back or not, they are no longer allowed to play in college football. So let's break it down. We'll go over the special teams, the one player that Syracuse is definitely going to miss in that unit. Plus, we'll go over some of the players that the Orange are going to lose on defense. And we'll start the show by talking about the players that Syracuse football will lose on offense. All that and more coming up here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. And before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Before we get into some of the key players that Syracuse is going to miss on offense due to being out of college eligibility, I just want to let you all know that the players that we're about to talk about, the good news is it does not compare to what Syracuse lost at the end of the 2024 season. Syracuse football was gutted. Looking back on it, completely gutted. Guys that lost their eligibility after 2024 include, but are certainly not limited to, Kyle McCord, Jackson Meeks, Fadil Diggs, Clarence Lewis, Marlo Wax, Justin Barron, Savion Washington. The list goes on and on of really key, impactful players on a Syracuse team that ultimately went 10-3 in 2024, and they were certainly missed in 2025. That being said, there are still some players that were pretty impactful that are definitely going to be missed, and we'll go over also how Syracuse could potentially replace these players. And on offense, and in general, in my opinion, the biggest loss is, and I can't believe I'm saying this, is Dan Villari. The reason why I say I can't believe I'm saying this is because if you told me a year ago that Dan Villari was going to be the biggest loss for Syracuse football in terms of being out of college eligibility, I would have said, really? Dan Villari? He has, I get he was pretty good in 2023 in moments, but he's going to have a huge role in 2025, and he's actually going to produce and have a career year. Well, lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. Dan Villari was a quarterback recruit to Michigan before he transferred to Syracuse and moved to tight end ahead of the 2022 season. And he had a career year in 2025. He caught 39 passes for 412 yards, also a big leader of Syracuse football. He's a bigger loss than what the numbers would indicate. Again, 39 catches, 412 yards. It doesn't wow you. It doesn't jump off the page. It's not the gaudy numbers that Oronde Gadsden used to put up at tight end. But keep in mind of Syracuse's quarterback situation in 2025. Outside of Steve Angeli, it was rough. And we all know that. The first 4 games with Steve Angeli, here are Dan Villari's numbers. 20 catches for 240 yards. Over a 12-game season, that samples out to be, or that paces to be, 60 catches for 720 yards in, again, 12 games. So it's a bigger loss than I think we may realize just on the surface. But once Steve Angeli went down, like every other pass catcher on Syracuse football, the numbers went down for them. My guess is that Syracuse will look in the transfer portal for a tight end. I don't know if it's at the top of the list of their needs, but it certainly should be one of the priorities for Syracuse heading into this offseason. They do have one young player to really keep an eye on at tight end, but he also plays some wide receiver as well. He needs to add on more weight. That is Dante Bacchie. He is a young player 5 catches for 42 yards this past season as a true freshman. Again, he was mostly playing some wide receiver, and that's because he needs to add weight. If he adds weight, perhaps he could step into the role as a starting tight end. But at least for right now, I think Syracuse should pay some attention in the tight end market and perhaps grab a starting tight end there in the portal. Next up, Justus Ross-Simmons, a wide receiver. He transferred to Syracuse from Colorado State ahead of the 2024 season. He battled injuries in his first year. I mean, we had high expectations for him, but he suffered a hamstring injury, I think, towards the end of fall camp. It bled into the regular season, and by the time he really got up to speed, he had been surpassed by multiple wide receivers on Syracuse's roster, the big one being Jackson Meeks, who transferred over from Georgia that very same year. So for this season, with a clean slate, I think a lot of us were expecting that Justus Ross-Simmons would have a better year, and he somewhat did. The numbers, again, they don't jump off the page, but how much of it is because of Justus Ross-Simmons versus what the quarterback situation was? He had played in 8 games, 20 catches for 312 yards and 5 touchdowns. Justus Ross-Simmons, I think with a proper quarterback, would have been a better wide receiver than those indicate. That being said, Syracuse does have good internal replacements for Justus Ross-Simmons. Obviously, the big one is 5-star wide receiver Calvin Russell in the class of 2026, but the often forgotten one in the very same class as Calvin Russell is a 4-star Amari Goff. He is a consensus 4-star, I want to say. I think the only site that didn't rate him a 4-star might have been 24/7 Sports, and it would just be 24/7 Sports. Their composite definitely has him as a 4-star. Regardless, for the most part, he is a highly touted prospect in his own right. And like I said a few days ago, we'd be talking a lot more about Amari Goff, if not Calvin Russell being in the very same class. So you got 2 really solid internal candidates that could replace a guy like Justus Ross-Simmons. I also do expect, whether it's for depth or whether it's actually adding a high impact player, that Syracuse is going to add a wide receiver in the transfer portal. Syracuse added multiple wide receivers a year ago in the portal, and wide receiver wasn't even their big need. And I know Jonte Cook is included in that. Jonte Cook was the Trevor Pena replacement, but I don't think Syracuse would have gotten Jonte Cook if not for Trevor Pena leaving. So I digress. Jonte Cook, by the way, he still has eligibility. It just depends on whether or not he's going to come back, which at the time of this recording, unsure if he is coming back. Finally, for the offense, you got a trio of starting offensive linemen. You got TJ Ferguson, a left guard, a 2025 Florida State transfer, Austin Collins, a 2025 Louisville transfer that played center for the Orange this past season, and Demetrius Weatherspoon, who played some tackle, 2024 Howard transfer. I'm going to let you all in on a little secret. Syracuse football is going to add offensive linemen in the transfer portal. The Orange this past year did not have a single 100-yard rusher, and they also allowed over 3 sacks per game, which was towards the bottom of the FBS. So not very good. Bottom line, the offensive line last year was not good enough. I don't think that necessarily excuses the abysmal quarterback play that we did witness with Ricky Collins and Joe Filardi and all the others. But it certainly didn't help either that they didn't have the Great Wall of Dallas protecting them. So while, Syracuse is losing 3 starters along its offensive line due to eligibility, were they really all that impactful? Given the numbers that I just said to you, not a single 100-yard rusher, towards the bottom of the ACC in yards per carry, allowing over 3 sacks per game. I think Syracuse football could do a lot better along its offensive line, and I do expect that they are going to be aggressive in adding offensive linemen in the transfer portal when it officially opens in early January. What are your thoughts? Comment in the comment section below. In your opinion, what's the biggest loss for Syracuse football on offense as far as players who are losing their college eligibility? In my opinion, like I said earlier, it's Dan Villari, but maybe you feel differently. Maybe you feel it's one of the offensive linemen. Maybe you feel it's Justus Ross-Simmons. Comment in the comment section below. Now coming up, the players that Syracuse is losing on defense. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Syracuse. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything just feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver may get hot, a defense will tighten up, or the momentum will just swing after a big turnover, and FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Syracuse football is losing a lot of players on defense due to college eligibility. Couple in the secondary, and basically the entire defensive line. Let's break it down. You got both safeties. Devin Grant, a 2024 Buffalo transfer. If you recall, Devin Grant's signature moment in a Syracuse uniform happened at the end of the 2024 regular season against Miami, where in the third quarter, he strips Xavier Restrepo, who had just gotten a first down, recovers the fumble, and takes it all the way back to the house, which gave Syracuse its first lead of the game. And they would not relinquish it. They would go on to beat Miami to close out the regular season. So Devin Grant is out of eligibility. Deuce Chestnut, well-known figure here in the Syracuse community. He returned to Syracuse in 2024 after 1 year with LSU. I think that Grant and Deuce as a duo performed better in 2024 than what they showed in 2025. And I don't think that that's necessarily because they regressed as players. I think it's more so of what they were asked to do in 2025 versus what they were asked to do in 2024. In 2024, there was a lot more talent on that Syracuse defense, which, as we've talked about many times, it's kind of surprising that a defense with the amount of talent that it did have was rated so poorly. But regardless, it had more talent. So they weren't asked to do all that much, or they were asked to do a lot. I mean, they were starters, but not as much compared to what they were asked to do in 2025, which is be leaders of the Syracuse defense. I do think that Syracuse, whoever they decide to go after in the portal or decide to go with an internal option, they can do better than Devin Grant and Deuce Chestnut. But also, if you told me, hey, they both got another year of eligibility, they're coming back, I would not be upset about that either. So I kind of view it as a neutral. I obviously wish them all nothing but the best. Syracuse can do better, but they can also do worse than those two guys. So we'll find out what Syracuse has in store at the safety position this offseason. I think they're going to go in the portal and at least add one, maybe two. Defensive line. Yeah, they're pretty much losing everyone. But I don't know if it's really that big of a deal that they're losing everyone. We'll go through all the names. But I'm also going to list out what they did with Syracuse. None of these guys really produced. Just being honest. Just being frank. I mean, the numbers are the numbers. Let's start with Dennis Jacques. 6.5 sacks in 34 career games with Syracuse. Deion Tank Wilson, he was actually Syracuse's best run defender over the past couple of seasons. George Rooks, a 2025 Boston College transfer who had no sacks this season. David Reese, 2025 Cal transfer. I remember when Syracuse got David Reese and I said, hey, this is a solid addition. I don't think he's as good as Fidel Diggs, but he has 11 sacks over the past 2 years. He was with Cal, which I know they're not necessarily a great team. Still, that's a power conference team in 2023 and in 2024. I know they were in different conferences, but still a power conference team, and you have 11 sacks over 2 years. This is a serviceable player. Well, he delivered 2.5 sacks for Syracuse this season. Kevin Jobity, 10 sacks in 38 career games with Syracuse. He did have one signature game, which was in 2025, so this past season, where against Pitt, he had 3 sacks and essentially did his best Aaron Donald impression. It was one game, but he looked dominant in that one game. Chris Thomas, a 2025 Marshall transfer. I know he was more of supposed to be a run stuffer for Syracuse, which, side note, they did not stop the run at all this past season. And as far as the sack total is concerned, he had half a sack in 9 games. Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, 0.5 sacks in 44 career games with Syracuse. I'm going to double check that right now, because is that right? I do these notes properly normally. Half a sack. Yeah, it's correct. College reference. Half a sack in 44 games for Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff. Oof. Yeah, and with Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, I think we all know that moment in 2022 against Clemson. I'm not going to further elaborate on that, but that's how I best know Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff. So, look, ladies and gentlemen, I wish all those guys nothing but the best on their future endeavors. But as far as what we're talking about, which is Syracuse football and improving as a team and how they can get better and being open to change, I think the best thing that could happen to Syracuse right now is the fact that they're not having any of these guys coming back. They're all out of eligibility. These guys, quite frankly, they didn't produce. That's the bottom line. They did not produce as a unit in 2025. The guys that were there in 2024 did not produce. The guys that were there in 2023 did not produce. 2022, they did not produce either. So, again, nothing but the best of those guys on their future endeavors. But with Syracuse specifically, it's time to go to work, and it's time to really improve this defensive line. They got to start generating a pass rush. They got to start figuring out how to stop the run, because these past couple of years have been unacceptable. The good news is that reinforcements are on the way. Syracuse has 3 4-star defensive line recruits in their 2026 recruiting class. That's good, but especially along the defensive line, you don't want to be too reliant on true freshmen. So I expect that Syracuse is going to be very aggressive in adding to its defensive line in the transfer portal, because I also look at the other internal options that Syracuse may have, and none of them really jump off the page. So I expect that Syracuse is going to attack defensive line in the portal, and we'll elaborate more on that in the coming days here on Locked On Syracuse, where we go over Syracuse's specific needs in the transfer portal. Maybe you feel differently than I do, so feel free to comment your thoughts in the comments section below. Do you see any big losses for Syracuse on defense due to guys being out of college eligibility? Feel free to share your thoughts right now in the comment section below. Now, coming up, the one key player that Syracuse will definitely miss on special teams. Find out who that is next on Locked On Syracuse. Let's talk about something that most men don't bring up, but absolutely should. Stress from work, money, life. It doesn't just switch off at night. And when it shows up at the worst possible time, Rougiette Ready is designed to help you take back control. Rougiette Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment created to support both the brain and the body so you can feel present, confident, and ready when the moment matters. It's easy to understand why over 150,000 men have already made the switch. If you've been thinking about taking the next step, now's the time. Head to Rougiette.com/LockedOnCollege. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. Rougiette Ready. Feel present, feel confident, feel ready. Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. There is one key player that Syracuse will miss on its special teams due to this player being out of college eligibility. And I think you guys could probably guess who that player is. But I'll give you a couple seconds. 1, 2. All right, time's up. Jack Stonehouse. Jack Stonehouse was Syracuse's best player in 2025. Aside from a healthy Steve Angeli, it was Jack Stonehouse. And it's good that he was really good, because Syracuse punted a lot in the 2025 season. It's unfortunate that we had to use Jack Stonehouse a lot, but you know what? He got to showcase his ability, and he was a darn good punter. And I'm not saying that sarcastically. All conference punter. In the pros, I think it's very easy to take punting for granted because for the most part, all the punters that you watch on Sundays are exceptionally talented. There's really not much of a gap between the best punter in the league and the guy who's 28th in the league in punting. There's just not much of a gap. You see how they punt the ball, whether you're watching on your television or you're watching live. It's different. There's not much of a gap. That's the point that I am trying to make right here. But in college, as we all know, there's a lot of volatility with kicking, whether it's actually kicking or it's the punting is concerned with Jack Stonehouse. So when you have a good punter in college, I think it is important. So I don't want to minimize the loss of Jack Stonehouse just because he's a punter, because you don't want to live in a world where you don't trust your punter to be able to do their job. Just like we learned in Syracuse in 2024 with their kicking situation and how Syracuse did not have a reliable kicker. Fortunately, they corrected that with Trip Woody for the 2025 season. And I do hope and I do expect that he is going to come back for the 2026 season as well. Stonehouse, fantastic since arriving from Missouri ahead of the 2023 season. Now, as far as replacing him is concerned, there is one guy to really keep an eye on. There is an internal option. Calvin Russell is Syracuse's highest rated recruit. He's a 5-star. 24/7 Sports has him as the number 2 overall wide receiver in the country. But what if I told you that relative to his position, Calvin Russell is not the highest rated recruit that Syracuse has in 2026? You'd think I'm nuts, but I promise you I'm not. Per 24/7 Sports, Syracuse signed the number 1 punter in the nation. His name is Jimmy Gregg, and I'd imagine, given that he is a punter, and I don't know what the learning curve is between high school and college punting. I mean, if you can punt, you can punt, right? You got to think that he might be the starting punter for Syracuse in 2026. And given that he's the number 1 punter in the nation, probably should be. Number 1 guy. If he was the number 1 guy at any other position, we'd be saying this guy's starting right away. Calvin Russell's probably going to start as the number 2 overall wide receiver. So why not the number 1 punter? Being the Jack Stonehouse replacement. So that's a guy to definitely keep an eye on for Syracuse as far as an internal replacement at the punter position for Jack Stonehouse. Overall, like I said at the very top of this show, we went over a lot of players that Syracuse is losing due to them being out of college eligibility. But the good news is that it does not compare to what Syracuse lost a year ago. They lost Kyle McCord. That right there, not good. They lost Jackson Meeks, who was an all-conference wide receiver. They lost Fadil Diggs, who was by far and away their best player along the defensive line. They lost Marlo Wax, who was a captain and the leader of the defense in the middle, playing linebacker. They lost Clarence Lewis, who was an all-conference corner who got a look in the NFL. They lost Elijah Clark, who I didn't even mention at the top of the show. They lost Justin Barron. They lost Savion Washington along the offensive line. They lost a lot of high-impact players. And when you compare it to this year, Dan Villari is likely their biggest loss. So there is a lot of room for improvement for Syracuse heading into the 2026 season, whether it's using internal replacements or finding guys in the transfer portal, aka along the defensive line. This team has a lot of potential to be a lot better in 2026 than they were in 2025. It's not exactly a high bar to clear given how bad they were in 2025, but baby steps. I'm open-minded. So should you. Comment your thoughts right now in the comments section below. What do you think is going to happen with Syracuse this offseason? Do you think they'll be aggressive in the portal, or do you think they're going to rely more on internal replacements? Comment in the comments section below. Now, as far as what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the near future, Tomorrow night, Syracuse basketball is back in action. They are playing St. Joseph's at home at 9 p.m. Eastern. There will be a full post-game reaction show. If you recall, this was a game that actually got rescheduled. These two teams were supposed to play in Vegas before the Vegas Players Era Challenge, but for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter now. The game got moved to the Dome tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. Full post-game show coming your way. And then on Friday, Syracuse football transfer portal needs. They really do need some defensive linemen. We talked about it earlier in the show, but we will go more in depth on Locked On Syracuse as far as their portal needs on Friday. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I'll see you all again soon.